Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello and welcome to this Goodies podcast interview YouTube re-release. It's Jeff is here. I've got Jane with me.
Hello, 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 hello.
You're wondering why I've dragged you in here to record an intro and who is on the interview re-release block.
Well, yes, I was sort of hoping for a bit of information prior to getting behind the microphone, but I'll just roll with it.
Oh, well done. It's Stuart Fell.
Stuart, of course.
Yeah, he it could be said is a Goodies stunt man, but I think he did a little bit of Goodies stuntman stuff, and I think he was the British film and TV making world's stuntman.
Oh, so not just exclusively for the Goodies, but he spread himself around.
That's an extremely good way of putting it. He has been the alien in Aliens.
Oh, that's a good one.
The Alien Queen. He's been in Doctor Who several times. But we recorded this back in 2012.
When?
Mm-hmm.
That was when the world was real and there wasn't all this doom and gloom and the end of the universe and blah, 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 blah.
Long 8 years ago.
Yes.
And it was episode 103 of the Goodies podcast. And now we're repackaging it for the YouTube for you. So
it's the reboot.
Yes. I was about to say, enjoy this 50-minute interview with Stuart Fell. So it's more like strap yourself in for this 50-minute interview. But it is fun. It is great. So enjoy.
Bye.
And now on the Goodies podcast, we're very, very happy to be joined by Goodies stunt coordinator, Mr. Stuart Fell. Hi, Stuart. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm speaking from England.
You certainly are. So you started working with the Goodies around the time of Series 6, at the height of the show's popularity. So how did they bring you on board?
Right. Well, I had been a stuntman for about 3 years, trying to get in further and further. And it's one of the most difficult jobs in the world, becoming a stuntman. And the stunt work was mainly in films, almost entirely in films. And the stuntmen at the time used to hang around waiting for films, and they would be on them for about 3 months every day. And that was what stuntmen looked for, a nice long run on films. But there was work occasionally at places like ITV and BBC where they were making a series like the Goodies, and they would do their scheduling, and they'd say, like, in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be in Wales, and for 2 days we need a stuntman. Now, the regular stuntmen, they didn't want that type of work because it meant that they would agree to do it, and then a film would come up where they might be on it and might even go abroad on it for several months. And they'd say, well, I can't do that because I'm supposed to be doing something on the Goodies for a couple of days on quite low money. So they would avoid all that. But people like myself, there's a few people like myself trying to get into the game. And we used to pick up those jobs that basically nobody wanted to book. And I am fairly short. I'm 5'6". And I had been in the parish of Richmond. I'd been in Borneo and Aden and places like that. So I knew a lot of weapon handling. I'd been a physical training instructor. And I'd also been in the Army gymnastic team. So I was a gymnast doing the Olympic gymnastic apparatus. So I was quite physical. And many of the stuntmen were mainly either wrestlers, boxers, or riders. That's where most of the stunt work was in films in those days. But people like gymnasts, television and small companies liked them because they could do a stunt, and using their acrobatic ability, they would land on their boxes, and they put the boxes together, and they'd do the thing again, and again, and again, until it's right. But with somebody that would have been a boxer and he was doing a fall or something, he would fall into the boxes, and they think, oh, I got my back up. And they wouldn't be able to get him to do it again unless they paid him a lot of money. So I was making a bit of a reputation for myself doing these bits and pieces, and of course I was falling over myself to do a good job. And the directors in those days were staff directors. That meant that they would do the Goodies, they'd go on to another series, and do another series of a different type of thing. department. They would do various different plays, and they would get to know how you worked, and they would get to know that they could rely on you, and they would try and keep the stuntmen that they knew. Because, some stuntmen would turn up and they might be disappointed with them. But I was getting a bit of a reputation for being fairly useful, and they seemed to think that when I did my stunts, I could make them quite funny. And there was a man called Jim Franklin who had taken over the goodies at the time, and I had been either recommended to him or I'd worked with him on a different episodes of something else. I can't quite remember, but it was Jim Franklin that brought me into it, and he was very, very good with filming. Most of the television in those days was done on videotape. And with videotape in those days, believe it or not, you couldn't edit it. You couldn't cut videotape. They didn't have electronic boxes to edit it like you can do so easily today. They used to even have difficulty slowing down videotape. They used to have a special little disc that they had to put it on, and it never really looked quite right. Anyway, over to you again, Jeff.
Okay. So, pre-planning. Obviously, they wouldn't just ring you the day before. So I'm wondering, at what point did you get to look at things like storyboards for the episodes? Or at what point did they bring you in and say, here's our plans, can you be available?
Yes, well, Jim Franklin and his office would usually ring me up and ask me what dates I would be available for. And believe it or not, they used to sometimes arrange their schedules to fit me in, which was quite incredible to me. And because, they would say to me, well, if you can't do this, we are prepared to sort of shoot it on a day when you can do it. And I used to, as I say, specialize in these little television things where they need me for a couple of days or one day, and I'd be up and down all over the place doing different shows. And I would look in my book and I'd say, well, that week, I could fit you on a certain day. And there were some occasions where I couldn't get to them at all. And they would ring the department that I was working for, and they would say, look, we desperately need Stuart on this morning, and you've got him booked for something you're doing on something like Stuff of Wine or something. And they would actually say, well, look, we can arrange it so we don't need him till the afternoon, so you can have him in the morning. And that was absolutely brilliant for me because, they passed me around each different department, as it were, and they were cooperating like that. Now, that would never, ever happen on a film. They would say, no, we don't contract me. No way can you have him. But because they wanted to use me, they liked the way I used to perhaps turn up on time at least and do the job. They were prepared to bend over backwards for me. Anyway, they would let me know when their filming was. I would put it in the book so that I wouldn't get double booked. Now, often they would ring me up and say, we need your advice on this. Like, sometimes they would say, come and recce it with us. But more likely, they would just ring up and say, look, we've seen this location, and you're going to do a fall off the end of a pier into a boat, and you've got to go through the centre of the boat. If you're passing, could you drop in the special effects, or the visual effects, they used to call them then, and have a look at the boat they're building to make sure that the wood that you're going to go through isn't too hard. And that sort of thing. It'd be quite informal quite often, but sometimes they used to take me away on recce's to have a look at a location. On the other hand, they used to just call you out on the day. It's much cheaper that way. And during the tea break, the director would take you over to the location where you might be doing the stunt and say, look, we think that this is a good location. What do you think? And I'd say, well, if this rain continues, we're going to get a lot of mud over there. And when we get to that bit, we're all going to be slipping and sliding. So, if you give me a half an hour or so, I can find a better location than this. Please let me just go off and find a better location. eventually everybody agreed it was better. But it's a matter of the director having confidence in, that you're not spinning a yarn or trying to get out of the stunt or trying to make it easier. And it's just cooperating and mucking in with everybody, basically. So there was quite a lot of planning and a lot of phone calls and that type of thing. And they would give me the dates and that would be it.
So your arrival on set wouldn't necessarily be, at the beginning of the day and then leave at the end of the day. So, depending on when you got there, what was in place when you arrived on location?
Generally nothing. There would be nothing in place except if you'd have asked them, they might have a couple of hundred cardboard boxes, or sometimes they wouldn't have any cardboard boxes at all. They might have used them up for something else. And when I get there, I'd say, well, what have we got? And they'd say, well, we've got these crash pads, which in those days were pretty well just mattresses. And we've got half a dozen boxes left over from something. And I'd say, well, we need more than that. And I would literally go around to the local supermarket and grab every single cardboard box we could possibly find and bring them back to wherever we were and start coordinating this stunt. And they were usually happy. The thing is that they never had any money. And they were grateful that you could turn up and do whatever the script has asked for. And they appreciate that under certain conditions, it's going to be more difficult, especially if they've used the boxes you asked for something else. So often you used to have to get yourself out of trouble, or you get there and because it was chucking down with rain, you might be on a bicycle or something and have to go around a very tight corner, and the road might be very slippy or muddy and just not suitable at that particular place. And they'd let you run off and find another location. And there was never any arguments. The directors were very, very good at compromising, to be honest. And of course, the people that were involved in the writing were often there, and they'd agree that what you've suggested is better. It was great fun doing stuff in those days. You felt you did contribute a lot more, and often you'd get them out of trouble. They might be well behind, their shooting schedule with left and worse, but they would arrange it so that at least they'd get your bit done, and then you could shoot off and get on with what I had to do somewhere else. But there was a lot of filming, of course, in the goodies, because of the nature of the stories. There had to be a lot of frames speeded up, under cranking and over cranking, and a lot of trick photography in it, as you probably know. And I never actually watched the goodies until I started working on it. In fact, when I started working on it, I never managed to watch it because I was so busy doing other things that when the goodies went out, I wasn't at home to watch it. And it was in the days before we had video recorders.
Have you seen any of them since the days? I mean, have you come across the DVDs in a shop or anything like that and thought, I'll have a look at one of those?
Yes, when you rang me up, I went straight onto the internet, and the internet's full of them. You can get every single episode in a box set now for like nothing. You can get second-hand ones. I didn't realise that, and when this interview's over, I shall order the complete set. Although I was only ever involved in the later ones, I must say. But I do remember doing the last one. Perhaps it was the last one before they went over to ITV, I don't know. They did something for London Weekend Television eventually. But we did one episode, which I believe was supposed to go to for an award. And it never went out. And they shelved it for years. Whether it ever did go out, I don't know. You probably know more about that one than I do. But it was almost entirely on film, and we shot it at the historic studios of Ealing Studios. And I remember colour. That gives you a clue. And it must have been about 1974 at a guess. But now I can't throw any more light on that one.
Well, what we can do, if it's all right with you, is perhaps look at episodes we know you were in, and seeing as you've had a quick peek at some clips this week, maybe see if it unlodged any memories and things. You were talking earlier about daylight robbery on the Orient Express when you did, come off the wheelchair, or you fell off a pier onto a boat and things like this. And there was the big wheelchair chase scene in daylight robbery on the Orient Express.
Yeah. I do have memories. I remember where it was done. It was done in a place called Paynton in Devon. And it was a lovely summer's week. And I do remember they were great fun, these wheelchairs trundling down these hills. And there were lots of crashes. And I must have crashed several times as doubling for extras. They were probably extras in their clothes, and my wheelchair would come to mishap in a ditch or somewhere like that. And I remember the last one, I must have been doubling for one of the goodies because I was dressed like Marcel Marceau, a mime artist, and the wheelchair has to come off the end of a wooden jetty. And there was a boat there, and there were the other two goodies in it, I remember. And I had to land the goodies were actually dummies, but I had to land in the middle of the boat and avoid the two dummies. And this was done by building a boat with a section of it in the middle made of balsa wood. And I do remember that bit. And of course, there would have been other sketches or other bits of the story that we did all around Paynton in these wheelchairs. But there were so many of these small stunts. They were only tiny stunts, really. And of course, if you've got extras or actors in other wheelchairs, you can't expect them to do any falling out of wheelchairs or any funny rap stunts, slapsticks and that sort of thing. It's just too much to ask people. You don't know whether or not there's this other hip replacement or they've got various medical complaints. But it was sort of making myself useful and doubling for all sorts of people, which was great fun.
So, Scoutrageous, we know that you were a bank teller in that one, and the goodies, as scouts, had just robbed an armoured car, and you came running out to the car to try and stop them getting away.
Yeah. Well, it did happen. I think that's a clip that you sent me, or I found on the internet, and I watched it. And yes, I am that bank teller, and I do run after this, I think it was a sports car, and leap on the back of it. And as it's racing away at high speed, I'm slowly losing my grip, and I fall off and roll in the road. But, of course, Jim Franklin used to undercrank, which meant that when he went through at the normal speed, the car looked like it was going much faster than it really was. And I must say that it's a pretty decent stunt, but it's not as dangerous as it looks. We probably did it about 3 or 4 times. But that is something that was worth mentioning, that, of course, the goodies used to do all their own stunts themselves. They used to write these things so that they could do it themselves. And they hadn't had much experience meeting other stuntmen. And they didn't know how many boxes you would need to safely land in if you were doing a fall and that type of thing. They used to just guess it. And I remember turning up, and of course I would turn up and I'd have a bag with me, a bit like a sports bag, and inside this bag there would be pads. Now these pads in those days, they weren't just from the sports shop. They would be like American football players' bags. These pads they have on their shoulders, pads for their backs, pads for their hips, and then I would have football no, these pads that I used to carry in my bag. And I remember preparing for a stunt, and the three of them were watching me, and they said, yeah, we've been doing this show for so long now, and we didn't realise that stuntmen padded up. Which amused me, because we all get bruises the same, don't we? We could all break a leg just the same. But, of course, stuntmen were able to get away with it because we used to have these pads underneath the clothing that we were wearing for the stunt. And, of course, yeah, they were interested that when I had to do a fall, I would say, oh, we'll have half a dozen boxes here, and we'll open up one of the boxes so it makes a complete fat piece of cardboard. We'll put that on the top, and then I think that just one mattress will do, and we'll be able to fall in that. And providing I complete the somersault and land on my back, I shouldn't hit the ground. And it would work, because there is a formula for working that sort of thing out. And you'd have to be a stuntman to know what to do. Otherwise, you're taking quite a big risk. And, today, if you did that and you injure yourself, the company you were working for, they would get seriously into trouble with the health and safety as it is. And if they killed you, the head of the company would get done for manslaughter. It's a very, very serious thing. But I do remember their fascination that when I opened my bag, I've got all sorts of pads for to help me with the stunt. Over to you, Jeff.
Righto. Royal Command was an episode when the goodies were taking over from the royal family, because the royal family had all injured themselves in Royals on Ice. And this entailed you dressing up totally covered in bandages, and apparently you were playing the part of the Queen in bandages, and you'd be chasing the goodies around. Does any of this ring a bell?
Yes, it does. We did that in Cardiff, because in Cardiff there is this very wide road that is the same colour as Pall Mall in London, being red. And the part of Cardiff where this is, it's got the same sort of trees, and it's got a building alongside it that looks a bit like Buckingham Palace. That's why they had to do it in Cardiff. And I remember lots of things with that particular episode, but in particular there was quite a lot of work with horses. We had a landau, which is a carriage, and we had two horses, and I had to drop from the sky into the back of this landau. Now, the landau didn't have its top up. The landau had its top folded down, and I had to drop from a crane onto this carriage being driven by two horses as it passed me, and I was supposed to land in the landau. And in the event, what happened is that I dropped, and I did land on the landau, but I landed on the back of it. Now, these landaus were supplied by people that worked on films, supplying various things like carriages and horses, and they were genuine, like 100-year-old landaus. And I remember as I hit the back of this landau, the whole thing collapsed onto the road with me on it. That's one thing I remember. That wasn't written in the script, and it won't be on the film. And I remember the setting up. I suggested that we found a cherry picker, and we drove the cherry picker along, and I dropped from this cherry picker. But in the event, apparently you can't drive a cherry picker with the arm out, otherwise, of course, it would tip over. So we had to have it stationary. And there was other bits that I believe I was actually on one of the horses. This is a different character now. I can't remember what character it was, but I do remember what happened here is that I was riding one of the horses that was pulling the carriage, rather like in Stagecoach. And what they call this rider is a postilion rider. And I had to work my way back into the carriage and drive these horses and release the carriage. And the horses, when the pole that connects it to the carriage fell onto the road, it made a loud noise. And the horses started to gallop very, very fast. And I had the reins. And as I said before, this road had these line of trees. And the horses were pulled to one side and then the other. And I was trying to stop them. But, of course, they were scared by the noise of the pole dragging on the road. And I was trying to pull them up. And every now and again, I could see these horses running straight towards a tree. And I managed to pull them around again. And they started to go across the other side of the road and run towards another tree. Anyway, I did eventually manage to stop the horses. But the landau that I had released was now running free down the road. And to everybody's amusement, there was just one car parked in this road because the traffic warden had moved everybody else. And it was the traffic warden's car. And this carriage ran straight into his car, which really amused everybody because he had been very, very uncooperative with his traffic warden. So that is one of the memories I have of that particular episode and our short time in Cardiff.
That would have been the traffic warden's nightmare scenario coming to life. Good Lord.
Yeah, well, I expect that he told that story as well. But, it did damage his car. I don't know who picked up the bill, but I certainly didn't. I have damaged other cars on other programs in the past, but not on the goodies. Anyway, next question, Jeff.
Righto. Well, I won't run through all the episodes, but there's still a few.
Do that many episodes of the goodies, though, didn't I? I mean, I just did Jim Franklin's, and there's a lot of trick photography that had to be achieved in odd ways, and Jim Franklin's way of achieving it was often to use me. But it was a very cartoon type of program, wasn't it?
Well, it certainly was, yeah. I mean, that's often how they describe it themselves.
Yeah.
Well, how did you find Bill and Graham and Tim to work with when they weren't getting advice off you?
Well, I found them great. Of course you would do. I mean, there were three friends from university, and they got on very, very well together. Yeah, they were just absolutely great. I used to have a meal with them in the evening, and of course on location and everything, and absolutely no trouble at all. Sometimes you do get people whose programs you work on, and they just go into their little caravan and hide away and lead a quiet life, and you don't often get to talk to them, but not so with the three of them. They were great fun, I must say. Which I used to love too, because I think Bill used to often, because he travelled around a lot as a bird watcher, he knew some great locations in the country. And we used to have all sorts of superb locations, like the Portland, Bill, I remember, and parts of Dorset and Wales. And as I said before, Torbay, which was Paynton which was near to Torquay. There were really, really good locations because he knew of them. And on our days off, Bill used to go and bird watch, and I used to like the countryside myself, so I was always quite pleased to get a couple of days away with the goodies. And often with my job, they would not need me. They'd say, well, we won't be doing your stuff until the afternoon, Stuart, so this is where we'll be, just turn up for lunch. So it was a really great thing to be involved in. it was a good episode. Well, it was a good show to be on, I must say.
Yeah, well, you've brought us, really, really nicely to Dodo Nuts, and apparently this was filmed in a field near Lanteret Major in Glamorgan, and Bill's trying to protect the last dodo by teaching it how to fly an aeroplane. Is there anything from Dodo Nuts that comes to mind?
I remember going to that part of Wales where they were doing the dodo. I cannot remember what stunts I did on it, if I did any at all, because they wouldn't necessarily just be doing that one episode that day. They'd be shooting film for any of the episodes in that particular series. And if, while they were on that location, they could shoot something for a different episode, they would do. So I might have been on the Dodo episode, or I might have been there to shoot something on a different episode. I can't honestly remember what I did with the dodo, but I do remember seeing all the special effects dodos.
Well, are there any memorable injuries, assuming you sustained some?
It was all pretty basic stuff on the goodies. The director that I knew, I only worked with one. There were three directors actually on the goodies. A chap called Howard Davis, wasn't it? John Howard Davis, who became head of comedy actually. He was the first director, and then Bob Spears. But I only really worked with Jim Franklin. I worked with Bob Spears on other things afterwards. But I never had any injury at all on the goodies. As I say, it was all pretty basic stuff there. And as a stuntman, incidentally, you have to be very, very careful not to get a reputation for being too outrageous, undertaking too dangerous things, because the last thing they can afford is for the stuntman to get injured and they don't get their shot. They want somebody that can do the stunt, and if there's a hair in the lens, that often there used to be, using film in those days, before electronic cameras, if there was a hair in the lens, you have to do it again. And sometimes there would be some other reason why it didn't work. I mean, sometimes you fall into these boxes and one of the mattresses will fly up and come into the frame. And they go, oh my goodness, we've seen the mattress. There's lots of things that can go wrong with a stunt. And they need somebody that can do it again and again and again. Well, you might do it the first time and injure yourself, and they haven't got their shot. So you've got to get a reputation for somebody that can say, look, I'm not happy with this. We're not going to be able to do this if we do it like this. We've got to do it and lower the height or something. But they've got to get what they need for the script, and they have to rely on you to say, this will work, and not to take too many chances, and certainly not injure yourself. I only really ever had 2 injuries in my whole career as a stunt performer. And both of those injuries, I wasn't doing a major stunt. One was just riding a horse, and the horse fell and trapped me between the ground and its body, rolled on top of me and dislocated my hip. That put me out for 3 months. And another one was I was on some very, very high stilts. I was supposed to be in the desert on stilts in the sand, of all things. And I jumped off the stilts at the end of the shoot. And they were very high up off the ground, about 10 feet. And I thought I was jumping into sand, whereas the sand wasn't very deep, and it was actually a studio floor. And I damaged a cartilage, which had to be operated on. So there were the only 2 actual stunt injuries that I ever had that were that serious. Often, if you're working with trampolines and things, and you keep on doing the same stunt several times, you'll get a very, very stiff back, which can take days of physiotherapy to relieve you of the pain. But generally speaking, being a gymnast, I used to just work on the tricks that I'd learned as a gymnast. That's a great asset, being able to do that. And of course, in those days, I'm going back like 35 years, there wasn't a lot of people, even here in England, that could teach gymnastics. You didn't get it in schools, you usually got it in the military. Well, only in the military at that time. They had the coaches that were good enough to teach you to that standard.
There's a few names that, pop up now and again alongside yours in the goodies. I'm just wondering, who were some of the other regular stunt personnel that you worked with on the goodies? I mean, I've got names like, Terry Walsh, many of us have heard of. There's Sid Child. Who are some of these people, and how often did you work?
Right. I can't remember whether I was on the goodies with them. I might have Terry Walsh. I knew him very well, and he became a fencing master and fencing instructor, and worked on some great films arranging the fencing and the fights. I can't remember whether I worked with him on the goodies, but he obviously did something. It might have been before me. He might have worked for Bob Spears or even John Howard Davis. Now, Sid Child, she was one of very few stunt girls. At the time, there was about perhaps 3 stunt girls that used to get the work. But in those days, directors used to dress myself up as a girl. They preferred to use stunt men doubling for girls, unless it was for riding or obviously swimming. If they could get away with it, like in a car or something, and there was a lady actress, they would use a man with a wig on, or a small, slim man. Well, Sid Child, she was on the Avengers, and she was almost fully employed while they were making the Avengers. And she used to double for Dinah Rigg. And she was an expert judo performer. And she did some very, very good work. Again, I don't know what she did on it, but it was probably one of Bob Spears' episodes that he might have brought her in. On the other hand, they might have asked me if I can find a girl that could do something, and I might have brought her in, but I can't remember. The thing is that we were working pretty well to full capacity in those days. BBC used to work, make so many programs that we couldn't work on them all.
If listeners aren't familiar with a lot of the shows you've been on, can you give us a bit of a list of the shows you did used to work on? If you're at full capacity, what were you going to?
As I mentioned earlier, I used to do a lot of work for the BBC because the staff directors, they used to pass me around. And you get a lot of satisfaction from working on these small programs. But I did work on a lot of films. I was on Superman 1 and Superman 2. And I've been in Star Wars, although I didn't do a lot of work on Star Wars. The people on Star Wars, they get booked for week after week after week. But because I was so much on TV, I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd be pre-booked for various days. So, but I had been called on things and done things on Star Wars. And Roger Rabbit, I doubled for Bob Hoskins on Roger Rabbit for about 4 months, which was a great experience. And I've done things like Bridge Too Far, which was quite good since I was in the parachute regiment anyway. And other things, I don't know whether you've seen them over there. There was things like Pole Dog and Kenny Everett show, and I used to double for Kenny Everett. And Last of Summer Wine, I don't know whether you've had those sort of things. Keeping Up Appearances, and Dick Emery shows, those sort of things. The Arabian Adventure was a film that I was in for, and I played a character all the way through it. And numerous, absolutely new. I haven't got a lived in front of me, but it goes on forever. And it's been a great career, and all down to gymnastics, really.
And how spry are you with things these days? Do you do things to keep yourself in shape?
I don't specifically go to the gym, but I am 70 now, and I don't feel unfit whatsoever. I haven't put any weight on. Well, I might have put a few pounds on, but I'm not overweight at all. None of the injuries that I've had have been lasting, so it doesn't stop me doing any walking around or running even. I often use my bicycle, and I have a camper van which I use a lot. I also fly model aircraft. We've got some cliffs where I live on the south coast, which is absolutely ideal for chucking gliders off the cliff. And the lift there is really, really good. Other people here do paragliding and things, but my wife gets a bit nervous of me doing anything like that at the age of 70, so I had to knock that sort of thing on the head. But I used to love doing parachuting when I was in the parachute regiment. But I'm still fairly fit. I don't accept any stunt work anymore. It is a different thing in England, even, where we do still make films. There isn't as much work as there used to be, mainly because of the health and safety, and they can do so much more now on computers. So I don't do any of that. When the health and safety came in England about 20 years ago, and it became quite serious for us because it meant that whatever occupation you're in, you're not allowed to employ anybody to do anything dangerous. And if that person gets injured, and then your company gets fined, if you injure them that badly that they get killed, and then you could be done for manslaughter. And it's a very serious thing over here if you injure people. I bet it's not nearly as bad as that in Australia, and that's probably why you've made some pretty good stunt films over there. But here it's taken very, very seriously, and the amount of red tape involved with doing a stunt now, I just can't be bothered with it, to be honest.
I have to not let this opportunity pass to ask you about the role of Alpha Centauri in one of the Peladon stories where you were in the...
Well, there were two Peladon stories, and I did both of them, but I wasn't the voice. That was Yvonne Churchman that did the voice, who was an expert voiceover. She used to be in the Archers as well, as it happens. And, well, there we are. I don't even know whether she's still alive. But yes, I was Alpha Centauri, and as a stuntman in those days, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to be involved in a Doctor Who for so long, because I think the first Alpha Centauri adventure was 4 episodes. I was on it for 4 weeks in the rehearsals. Alpha Centauri was in every other shot, and there was a lot to learn. And the movements of Alpha Centauri had to be sung with the voice and everything. But it was great fun doing it. And then they did another adventure, and I think that went on for 6 weeks. And of course, it's great fun working with great actors like John Pertwee. And the directors, again, as I say, they go on to other dramas, and when they go to these dramas, they've got a stunt, and they go, well, get Stuart in, and he'll do this. But I did get known for being willing to do monsters. A lot of actors don't like to play monsters because their faces are covered. It doesn't really get them very far. So, they're looking for parts where their faces are seen more. But as a stuntman, we don't mind our faces not being seen. In fact, we prefer it. And it gives you something to do other than just the stunt. And there's things like Aliens. I was in Aliens, and I was inside one of the monsters in Alien. In fact, I was in the Queen Alien. She was laying all the eggs for all the aliens to hatch out of, and wreak havoc everywhere. Do you remember that film?
Oh, I certainly do. Oh, yeah.
That they had two teams of us. There were two people in this Alien Queen, and they had another team of us that took over because it was very jetic. But having done things like Alpha Centauri, worked inside these monsters, you get remembered and asked to do other monsters. So I did lots of monsters. I did Morbius in Doctor Who, and the Shrivenzahl, and all sorts of monsters that were very uncomfortable to get in, but I didn't mind doing them. I enjoyed it.
Oh, that is brilliant. So what happens with lines in those? Because your movements, as you say, they have to be in sync with the lines. Was someone off to the side reading from the script, or do you go muffle, muffle, muffle through the costume? How would that work?
No, well, I would also know the lines inside the costume, and I could hear the lines, as I said, and I could make the movements for the arms and the eye, and the reactions. There was a lot of reactions in that, looking to the left and right, and looking surprised. And at one point, I think Alpha Centauri does actually fall on the ground, and things. But it's just an acting job that was very uncomfortable, because in those days, it was all on video, on videotape. There's no way you can or could edit videotape in those days. And each scene had to be done in order that it was going to go out as a recording. And they could actually cut it at the end of the scene and then start it again. And they had about an hour and a half to record half an hour's episode, which isn't very long. And the BBC, the electricians used to pull the plug exactly on like 10 o'clock at night, because they didn't want anybody running over and all the electricians going home at 1 o'clock in the morning. So there was a lot of pressure on directors. So if you were playing a monster, you would have to be in that costume, ready to work for the whole of the time that they were filming or shooting it. So you'd be in there at least an hour and a half, usually half an hour before they actually start recording. So you'd be inside that costume, under the studio lamps and the heat in that costume. There's no windows or ventilation like that for at least 2 hours. And the helmet, or the head of Alpha Centauri, was made out of fiberglass. And as that stuff gets hot, it gives off a gas inside. That they had to have people in monster costumes collapse in the studios. So that is why they liked people that were fit and were stuntmen to do those parts if they could get away with it.
Good Lord. And fiberglass is probably, they'll tell you these days that's probably cancerous now, or something like asbestos.
It probably is, yeah. They used to put a simulated smoke on you. When I was in a costume which was having my arm blown off and my head blown off as a Cyberman, they put a smoke on me, a chemical. And it was in the wind. We were out filming up in Snowdonia in Wales, and the wind blew this smoke into my helmet, and it went through the little tiny holes in the helmet as I was breathing, and went down my throat, and it was choking me. And I was inside this costume, and I was supposed to be dying anyway in the film, and they didn't realise that I really was choking inside this thing. But the visual effects saw what was happening, and he tore the costume open so I could breathe some fresh air. But yes, some of the stuff that they did use, they had to stop using because it was poisonous.
Oh, jeez.
But I'm still alive, so I'm all right.
That's good.
Oh, right, well, I've got one last question for you, if that's all right. So you have done, well, you've done a lot of sci-fi, you've done a lot of drama, you've done comedy. A lot of these might present you with strange situations. So how does the goodies rank in terms of strange situations, given that you've been in wheelchair chases and dressed up as the Queen in bandages? On the strangeness factor, which ones were the highest?
Well, I would say the goodies were typical of what a wonderful life it is to be a stuntman, because they never asked you to do anything that was really what you didn't want to do. They were just great fun and they allowed you to contribute ideas to the actual stunt, and they were greatly satisfying, really. I just wish I'd seen them go out at the time, but at the time I was also working doing a live show in London. So when they went out, I was never able to watch them go out, and we never had any video recorders in those days to record them so I could watch them when I got home. So I don't even think that I ever saw any of those goodies at all go out when they went out on schedule.
Well, Stuart, this has been fantastic, and thanks so much for sparing time to talk to us. And it's a point of view we haven't heard anything of, the stunt work in the goodies. So it's just been tremendous for us to actually hear about it.
Okay, Jim, it's been a pleasure. It's just too bad that we live such a long way from each other.